One thing we're going to start covering is designing websites specifically to be used on multiple devices. Think smartphones and tablets, in addition to having them look appealing on a desktop. When you think about the way that web design initially started, web designers used to build web pages for around 800 by 600 pixel resolution. So thinking 15-inch monitors at most. But if you think about how the size of monitors themselves have really exploded in the last decade or so, now we have ultra wide monitors that are almost the size of a small television, as well as different formats like smartphones, like tablets. We have many, many, many different screen sizes that we're now, as designers, held accountable to make sure that our websites look as appealing as possible on any of these formats. So, something that you may have noticed if you have a smartphone is a beautiful website may look fantastic on a desktop, but when it's shrunk to a mobile phone size, it can be tiny or difficult to read or almost impossible to navigate because the buttons are so small or the text is too small to be legible. Some designers get around this by building separate mobile versions of their websites and using server-side programming on the back end. These sites can detect the type of device you're using and then deliver a web page customized specifically for that type of device. That's time consuming though. Building an entirely separate website to serve the same function seems counterproductive in a way. And not all of us have the time to create two versions of a website or the technical skills necessary to program a server to detect a visitor's browser. Fortunately, Dreamweaver does include some tools that can help tackle the problem of mobile site design. The most straightforward of them is just using CSS. CSS allows you to use media queries that let you check the resolution of a device, for instance, how many pixels wide a particular screen happens to be, and then can supply styles specifically for that particular resolution. So as an example, if someone's using a older mobile phone that has, we'll say, 320 pixels wide as the portrait mode or the vertical mode, you can apply styles to format that page to fit that dimension and still be legible or readable. Dreamweaver has some tools built in for this sort of thing. So if you want to be able to see what your website might look like on a particular size device, you can do that. Down here at the bottom of your screen, kind of near where the real-time preview option is, there's an area that shows some dimensions right here. Right now, this is showing the dimension of the design section of the window that's open. If I click on this, you have the ability to look at specific presets that are built into Dreamweaver right off the bat. So if you want to know how it'll look on an iPad, you can click that and the borders will adjust to give you that preview. iPhone 7, you can do the same thing. You can see not nearly as good looking, but this would be how this particular page would be displayed on that size device. And it tells you the breakdown of the pixels in terms of width and height of the screen itself. So that gives you that layout here. Full size will just return you back to whatever the Dreamweaver is set up to at that point. But you can also edit or add sizes. You can also get to this by going to edit and in preferences clicking on window sizes. So I have a Galaxy S7. So if I wanted to give a preset specifically for my particular device, I could add that in. So I looked up the dimensions and the width is, this is in pixels, not necessarily screen dimensions itself. So 1440 pixels by 2560 pixels, and I'll type in my description. So Galaxy S7. Click apply, close, and now that's an option here, and I can get a preview. And you can see I've got a decent resolution there, so that's going to give me a lot more wiggle room than some of the iPhone or iPad related content. You can also opt to check it in portrait and landscape, so you can swap between those. If I go to a smaller screen, see landscape, things start to do strange stuff in the divs, but for the most part, the content is mostly visible by switching between those. So Dreamweaver, without having to even worry about having an internet connection to preview online, you have the ability to check certain dimensions right within your software without a problem. So the way that media queries work, media queries are essentially giving you a separate style sheet to control how content arranges or is displayed based on the size of the screen. So you're able to assign styles to a page, any web page or an entire website based on the width and height of your destination browser. So whatever it's being viewed on. So you can create styles for mobile phones, tablets, and desktop PCs to customize your site's formatting to make sure that it looks great on each type of device. Let's look at a website that has media queries. So here's a website that's got a 2-column layout that's relatively easy to get used to and understand. But watch what happens when I shrink. You'll notice how the navigation relocates to be beneath this image, and all of this content enlarges. And as I shrink that, you'll notice that it adjusts, and then eventually this image disappears because now we're getting to be in a little bit too narrow of a layout, and it just simplifies. Navigation's still visible, content is still visible, images are still visible, but the large photo has relocated, and they continue to adjust. You'll notice they go from being 3 pictures wide to 2 pictures wide, and that's about as far as it'll go. So each of these changes, each of these points, these are all being controlled using media queries. If I take a look at the source code for this website, and I can scroll through their styles, but I'm just going to type in media to take a look at where each of these breakpoints are. And take a look at this. Media with a max width. Another one might say media with a max width set to 40 pixels. Each of these items is a query. It's just a question that the web browser asks, is this screen 400 pixels wide? And if the answer is yes, it adjusts the margin and the width and the adjustments of that particular content, whether it's a div, whether it's a picture, to adjust based upon the size of the screen. Here's another one beneath it. With a wide screen, so minimum width, you're going to notice that the content changes. The navigation floats to the right. Other items change content. The footer is displayed a little bit differently. So that media attribute, that at media right here, is allowing Dreamweaver to set up the conditions to use a particular style sheet. So only these styles and the ones beneath it are going to be functioning if the minimum width of the screen is 1300 pixels or larger, is essentially how it works. With media queries, it's best to use a range of values. So you might want to style it to not just be minimum and maximum. You might say maximum width is a certain size, minimum width is a certain size for sort of a in the middle or medium media query size for maybe like a tablet as opposed to just a smartphone. So, fortunately, Dreamweaver doesn't require you to know how to write media queries because the CSS designer gives you those tools that you need to create them for your desktop, your phone, your tablet browsers, or multiples. You'll notice that this website looks excellent on a widescreen, but would look good on a smaller or narrower screen as well, such as a laptop. So if we come back over to Dreamweaver here, we've already got our bacon.css built, but you'll notice there's a section here called media. This is going to be, this is your at media. So this is the same as that little chunk of code we were looking at in the browser. So by clicking that, this lets you define your media queries. You can set up specifically how wide you want those screens to be in order to ensure that your website displays the way that you want it to on different screen sizes. Remember, you can have as many style sheets as you want, and each one can be a different screen resolution. So if you really wanted to make sure that you included a style sheet for every single one of these page dimensions, you very well could do that without a problem. But it's worth looking up what maybe the average screen sizes are for maybe the most popular mobile devices so that you don't give yourself unnecessary extra work. When you have however many style sheets you think you're going to need, you can either attach those sheets directly to a web page or to an intermediary style sheet, which is called a site-wide media queries file. So basically, you would connect each of those style sheets to the bacon.css, and then the bacon.css is the one that you connect to your web pages. It all kind of comes down to how you want to organize. It's sort of like using folders to organize files. You can use a single style sheet to control the media queries style sheets. So let's make a media query. I'll click on bacon. Once I have this style sheet selected is when the media queries option is going to be showing the active. It's not going to be grayed out like this icon here. And you're going to be defining the way that you would like to use your media query. So we're going to create a new file. So media is the screen. There are different medias that you can have, like they've got something for Braille. We're going to have it set to screen. Hit plus. You have the option to narrow down specifically how you want certain things to look. So landscape versus portrait. If you recall when we looked at some of the screen dimensions, websites look dramatically different depending on if the device was rotated horizontally or vertically. Ultimately, it's looking at the width of the screen, how it's being displayed. So orientation, if you really want to nitpick, you can go that route. But min and max width are going to be the areas that we're going to really focus on. So let's say I want to design this for a narrow phone. So minimum width is 0 to whatever. So I'm not going to set that for right now. But my maximum width, how wide do I want the maximum width to be? I'll do the 568 as my example, just my max width. So 568, maximum width in pixels. So this puts the code in for you. This has got your media, it's a screen, and the maximum width is going to be 568 pixels. And I'll click OK. Now let's say we want to make it a middle ground. We've got our phone size. Let's think about tablets. We'll stick with iPads for right now. iPad 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Max device width 1024. Okay. So now we want to make a middle media query. So we'll do another one. Still media screen. but we're going to include the minimum width and the maximum width. So I would say take your minimum and start here. I know it's smaller than what our dimensions are right there, but you want to make sure that you don't leave a gap where the styles do anything wacky. So we're going to start 568 and end at 1024. So 1024, 568. There we go. And again, it adjusts the code on your behalf. Click OK. And then we'll do the largest screen. So media screen, again, minimum width, 1024. So we're just picking up where the tablet style left off. At least 1024 is going to display this media or these styles. We'll click OK. So you're going to notice it's color coding these for you. This is going to help you stay organized with your styles. So now we're still in Bacon CSS, but we're grouping these styles there as well. So right now, my bacon.css styles apply to every item, no matter what is being worked on. You know, it's including all of my divs, it's including the image styles, the text styles, the etc. So really, I'm not changing the content, but perhaps I would like to style some of these items to appear different on each page. So we determined that certain device screens weren't so great. And this isn't working for a few different reasons. One, you're going to notice that all of my navigation text, even though the div is still visible, it's overlapping with the body. And my other sidebar is getting shoved all the way to the bottom because the picture's too big and the div's just not going in the correct spot. So instead of having the 3-column layout that works out real well here, we want to style that smaller screen to still show the information, but perhaps rearrange it in a way that's going to be easier to use, just like we did, or just like that was done here. How the content goes from being predominantly on the right side to being balanced, and then eventually it becomes stacked to work as cleanly as possible with any device width. So I'm going to switch to live mode. Now you see these 3 colored bars up at the top. You might notice they coordinate with the way that these colors have set up in our media queries. So if I want to adjust or preview rather how my web page is going to look, I can actually work in live mode to style based on the widths that I have set forth. So these are the snapping points. So I'm going to click on here so I can get a visual. And I'll go ahead and open this up. So I want to edit some of these selectors to work. And right now, the divs themselves are what's causing problems for me. So I'm going to grab my left, right, and content divs to take the styles that I already have and to transfer them from being in the bacon.css document to my specific media queries. I'm going to come click on the ones I want to relocate. So right click on my left side, which is the pink one, duplicate into media query, and then I'm going to tell it which media query I want to use. So I'm going to start with the small one. 1, 2, and 3. Now you're going to notice that it's going to make a copy here, but this is showing all the selectors. If you want to just deal with the ones that are within a specific media query, you need to come click here to check that. So because I duplicated these, I know that the width and the float and such need to be adjusted. So I'm going to turn my float for my left side off. So that worked. I also want to maybe adjust the navigation so they lay out side by side. So I've made a few adjustments, and I went ahead and brought in the navigation style sheet that we had made in a previous lecture. And you'll notice that I'm not having the content react the way that I expect it to. I can see the container of the div is stretching here, but the color is not. The reason that that's occurring is that my original styles here, the ones that I made a duplicate of to control my media queries, is present. If I hide those, so I'll go ahead and just delete those, you'll notice that now my div is reacting the way that I want it to because it's being viewed on the screen size. If I switch to another, you'll notice that a lot of that style goes away. That's because I have to make these copies only on the media query aspect, not on the main layout. These will still appear there, but they're being combined because of these media queries into the bacon.css. And if we look at our style sheet, it's adjusting where those styles are located in the bacon.css. So we're just making sure that this isn't being copied elsewhere. So I personally find it's easiest to make my changes at the smallest size, screen size, and then adjust it from there. So in order to correct this problem, the right side, right now it is set to a width of 12%, which we don't want because that's why it's trying to fill up space on that screen. So I'll click 0, or I click delete. I don't want to float it, so I'll delete that one as well. I'll come back down to content. Width is 70%. I don't like that, so I'll remove that. Float. Again, everybody's stacking, so I don't need to float, so I'll delete that. And now everybody's sort of stacked appropriately. So here we are. We've got the navigation style the way that we want it to be, but now we want to work on the next size up. So what we'll do at this point, we're still dealing with media queries. So I want to take these styles and I want to duplicate them to the next size up. Duplicate to the middle. Duplicate to the middle. And duplicate to the middle. So this is starting to look okay. Still not too keen on the layout. I think I want to go maybe put the navigation along one side and put maybe this sidebar beneath the pink one. So at this point, we would need to do the same thing for the navigation. We need to copy these styles to here. So the layout, as far as alignment goes, and the layout as far as the font and the margin and the display properties. So this and this need to go transferred as well. So I'm going to duplicate it. Actually, undo, copy this style, and I'm going to come over to my CSS. And I'm going to copy all styles, paste them here as well. And I should be able to unattach that and still have that appear relatively the same. We'd want to make some adjustments, but that we brought those styles in by just copying them into the CSS. Oh, I see we have to add the selector there. So one was navigation. There we go. And then this one was navigation list item. There we go. Close it off. That looks much better. Okay. So we basically copied those two styles over. And the reason I did this is because those were on a separate style sheet and it was giving us a little bit of a hiccup. So this is going to allow for this to be adjusted using the media queries as well. So I'm going to copy this, duplicate to this media query, and duplicate to that one again. So now we click in the middle. Okay, so now I want to alter some of this. So the list item, I don't want these to display inline now. And I still don't want the list style type to be visible. Make sure there's nobody else playing up. There we go. Making sure it's not. Okay, so now we've got everybody aligned here. So remember, I want to take this and I want to put it to one side. So now, this is my left side. I should have called it my navigation, but that's fine. I want to float it left. And I would like to control the width as a percentage. And we'll say, I like 15%, but I'm still going to noodle around with this just to see what's 15%. Float background color's good. It's the margin. It's the margin that's throwing me off. Or actually, I think it might be in part, I think part of the issue also is that it's still considered a list item. These are our list items. So I did hide the bullet, but I think it's still indenting a touch. So perhaps I'll do a negative. There we go. So I just adjusted the margin in negative to sort of bring it back to where it needed to be. My content, if this is 15%, I want to maybe adjust the content. So 100 minus 15 is 85. go 85%. And then we'll adjust our float. You'll notice this bump to the top. It's because it's got its own float, its own properties still. So we're going to adjust that. Oh, and it's still seeing the margins that I've got here. So we'll actually switch that to 80%. There we go. That actually gives us a little, there we go, it's got its own margin too, so its own margin and its own padding. So I'm just sort of attempting to space it out a touch. Okay, so now we have this div that we were intending to put on its own underneath the navigation bar. So now we're going to switch back to right side. I will control the width here as well. You'll notice it's trying to shove it to one side now. I'm going to adjust that 15%. So now it's attempting to fit in there. Float left. And I think the reason we're having that issue is just the width of the picture is possibly a touch too big. So I'll throw in a style for the new bacon image. And instead of 150 pixels, I'll try 100 pixels. Oh, didn't mean to put that in there. There we go. Still not wanting to play. There we go. That came down to whether or not the main div, the content div, was floated. By floating it left, it's staying next to the navigation that we have, but it was attempting to make this squeeze to its left. So by floating that content div right instead, it scoots over just enough to allow this to pop in beneath it. Now I'm noticing these two are touching. I don't much care for how that looks visually. So I'm going to throw in a non-breaking space. Just to attempt to sort of bump that down a touch. I think that looks a lot less crowded. And if I want space between the pink div and the yellow div, and I think I would, I'm actually going to go back to the left side. So that's the pink div. I should probably just rename these in colors, huh? And I'll just throw just a little bit of padding. Oh, not padding. Maybe some margin. There we go. Just a little gap between the two, just to give them a little breathing room. That's it. Okay, so let's go back in and check what we've done here. I'll widen that a hair. Now you'll notice that this size looks good. And when I transition back here, it starts to go awry a little bit. And I've looked at my styles, and my styles look good. But when I scoot that in just a hair, it fixes itself. And I'm not too sure what is causing that issue. Another thing that you can do to kind of troubleshoot is preview that in a browser. So here's how it looks in a widescreen. We haven't styled that yet, so it's not seeing the colors in the divs. It's just throwing everything in the way that we saw. When I shrink it, here's how the layout appears. And then here's where it starts to get a little unattractive. I'm going to go ahead and guess actually that this probably pertains to some of the changes we made to this div. Now we put a little bit of margin in there, so I'm going to check that. And then when I get it to the sweet spot, then it returns to looking attractive again. I just come in and I want to just check and make sure that all my styles are playing nice with one another. So color, color, margin on either side is there. Good. That's good. All right, so perhaps this guy is my problem. All right. So I'm just going to take a moment in this middle one, because I think maybe that's where the issue is. And I'm going to compare my CSS to one another, just to check. So here's my minimum. So content has a margin left and right. If I remove the padding, what happens? Okay, so I think that padding was part of the problem. I think this starts to do some funny stuff, so I might adjust the size of my picture as well. Make an image, maybe 85 pixels by 85 pixels. It's a little bit better. It's still sticking out of the div a little awkwardly, but ideally, if you think about it, when you're looking at screens on a device, unlike in a browser where you're going to be able to sort of do one of these numbers, you're not going to do that on a device. So once it hits that good spot, that's going to be how it appears. So I'm adjusting it. Theoretically, you shouldn't have to do too much adjusting when you hit those snap points. Okay. So narrowest screen with everything stacked. Medium screen with half stack and half stack. Now I can work on this layout, and I'll just switch over to live so we can preview it again. So I want to take all of these changes that I've made here, and I want to copy them over to my maximum screen, my biggest screen. So again, I'm going from the smallest screen to the largest screen. So I'm going to take these edits that I've made and transfer them to the new styles. So duplicate to the largest. You'll see things start to pop up. because this one pertains to controlling the size of this picture, I don't really want to do that. I like the way that it looks at this size of the screen, so I'm going to leave it as that is. So I'm actually not going to transfer this one over. If I change my mind, I can always come here, make a copy of it, bring it over. So now I'm going to click on the purple one. That's the widest screen I'm working with. I want to give it that 3-column layout again. So right side, I'm satisfied with. I'm not going to worry about that. Content, I have it set to 80. This one is set to 15. 15 and 15 is 30. So we're going to reduce this to 70% width instead, not 70 pixels, 70%. I'm going to change the float. Then I'm going to come to my right side. I'm going to float that left. Left. Okay. So now it's trying. It's doing its best. It's not quite able to squeeze that in. I'm going to come back to my left side and just take a look at that again and make sure that there isn't any margin affecting it. If it's just not wanting to squeeze in for whatever reason, I can always adjust my content. I can always go narrower. So instead of 70, maybe I'll do 65%, not 65 pixels. There we go. And that gives me a little bit of wiggle room to adjust. You'll notice that there's a couple spots along the border here where the text is practically touching the edge of the div. I don't care for the way that that looks. So I'm going to adjust my padding on either side. By adding this in, it will help to sort of close this gap. You'll notice I'm seeing something similar on the yellow div also. So click on my right side, and I'm going to do the same thing here, just to fill that in. And the gap's a little bit asymmetric. If you want to adjust some of the widths just to see how things will work out, you can always click in the field of the width panel and use the arrow keys on your keypad to go up or down. So it looks at 65 and 66 as kind of the middle ground. I could try to put in like a fraction just to close that gap a little bit. And that, 65 and a half is sort of that sweet spot, it looks like. So now small, medium, and again, I just need to check and make sure everybody's playing nice with one another. Now this spot's getting a little funny. So might be a little bit too tight of a squeeze. Let me just adjust that to 65, see if it fixes it. Maybe 60%. So it takes a little getting used to. It's not a perfect system, but it can ensure that you can get as much flexibility out of your page designs as possible and ensure that no matter what device is viewing your page, the content is going to be easy to read, understand, and use. There are more complicated methods out there like Bootstrap, which unfortunately our textbook does not cover in a lot of depth. So I don't feel comfortable lecturing too much about it if you don't have additional resources. But I did make a post in the discussion panel in order to make sure that if you want to use that as a resource or explore how to use an option other than media queries to provide you some fluidity to your mobile designs, that is an option. I think media queries are the most straightforward in terms of control, but there are additional options out there. A few things that you can use as far as strategies are concerned to make sure that your media queries are as flexible as possible for any media, any size device that might be showing your content. Keep in mind that phone browsers will typically zoom out to give a bird's eye view of your web page. I think we've all maybe visited a web page where everything was just itty bitty. And it can be kind of tough to read the content on the page without zooming in and then scrolling side to side to make sure you can read all the content. So, a few things to keep in mind: remove columns. Mobile devices work best with stacked content. If you look at this example, stacked content, it's all a vertical layout. Side by side is going to cause separate problems. So avoid side by side layouts like this on your smallest devices. Also, remove your widths. You'll notice when I switch to my smallest screen, everything's just affected by a background color. There are no widths. I might have had a teeny bit of margin on this, but I could even get rid of that and it would still look fine. Get rid of screen widths. So having your width set to auto or 100% is going to be the route that you want to go. It's going to give it a lot more flexibility. If you're giving your content a width, like I was giving these percentages, if you're giving your content, any of it, a pixel width, it's not going to stretch. Just how my picture here doesn't stretch when I adjust, it's getting bigger because of the style sheet, but the picture itself doesn't stretch if I make the screen wider. It doesn't fill up that space. Giving that item a percentage, I wanted to style that to be larger. I'll put that one in the, there we go, width 100% and height 100%. So if you want that picture to have some flexibility, see how it shrinks now? Smaller, bigger. You want to adjust that to be percentages. Percentages are the only fluid aspect in terms of width and height. Back to the smallest devices. Tighten up your white space. You want space between content and graphic to make sure that nothing appears crowded. I might even add some padding to the edge here just to give it a little bit of space. I don't want to make it look like it's too tightly packed in there because then it starts to have sort of that sardine can effect. Padding right. Not 10 pez, 10 pixels. So that gives it a little bit of space, but you don't want to put too much empty white space elsewhere. You need a lot more breathing room on a wide monitor than you do on a small one. So if it's a small monitor or a small screen size, get rid of all the excess white space because you don't need it. Large fonts. Quite a few of you have been using quite large typefaces. You don't want to scream at your viewers if they're looking at your website through a smartphone. So please make it appropriate for whatever device it is that you're working on. It is not going to be necessary to format your navigation in an H1 because here's how it looks like on a phone. You have to scroll before you can even get past it. That's silly. That's not necessary. Don't do it. hide content. If you decide, maybe you've got some big, beautiful pictures and you decide, you know what, this is secondary information. It's actually not that important. I don't want to use it. You can always hide content. If you click on that style, this is my right side div, and if you look at your layout section towards the bottom, there's an option called visibility. I can set that to hidden. It will completely hide it. Not only will it hide it, but if there's other content beneath it, I know it's not easy to see here, but if there's something else beneath it elsewhere, it will just fill up the space like it was never there to begin with. That's what ended up happening here. If you recall, this picture was visible. Once we get to the smaller screen size, it just goes away entirely. They just applied the visibility to hidden on that particular item. That's all they did. And lastly, consider using some background images. If you put a giant banner on a page, no phone will display it without zooming out. So if you want to make sure that your images are small enough to fit inside of that document, you can use a CSS background image instead. So if you want some sort of decorative element down here without including a giant panoramic beautiful photograph, just apply it as a background image. It will shrink to fit the size of the browser being used. Whereas if you bring it in as a regular image, kind of like what we did with the bacon, if that was humongous, it wouldn't work out quite so well. As I mentioned, this took care of putting all of your media queries onto your style sheet on its behalf. So I was able to work on all of my standard styling ahead of time. So I've got my H1, H2, H5 set up. These are taking all the other styles that I had made initially, but it's breaking down the layout of those divs and the appearance of certain items, such as the way my navigation flows, how big my pictures are, where the divs are located. It breaks that information up into media queries. So it's just, again, relate it like a folder. Everything in the media queries is going to be sort of held separately here, even though they're all technically attached to the same single style sheet. Style the way you normally would, but consider playing with the layout first and then adding content and tweaking and adjusting as you need to.